So welcome everybody, welcome to any new attendees, and welcome back to anybody who might have attended the seminar series last term. We're delighted to see you here today at the Cambridge SRI Early Researchers Seminar Series. My name is Aideen and I'm one of the organisers of the seminar series. As I said, we're delighted to see so many of you here today for the first seminar of Lent term. So as many of you might already be aware, Cambridge Reproduction is an interdisciplinary initiative that brings together researchers from across the university who have an interest in any aspect of reproduction, everything from science, technology and medicine to arts and humanities. And membership of the SRI is open to all staff and postgraduate students, and it gets you access to many of our events, funding schemes and regular newsletters, which have research highlights, events, opportunities and vacancies in the realm of reproduction research. So everybody's welcome to join the SRI. You can download the membership form from our website, and I think Christina, the fantastic administrator of the SRI, will be putting some links in the chat where you can find the download forms. So as I mentioned, today's seminar series is part of the Early Researchers series hosted by the SRI, and we're very grateful to the volunteer coordinators for organising this series, to all of the speakers, especially our speakers today, who have agreed to take part. So the seminar is held online on the third Thursday of each month from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. and details of forthcoming seminars can be found on the SRI website. We're always interested in receiving abstracts for future seminars. If anybody, specifically postgraduate students, postdocs, early career researchers would like to take part, either to present their own research or to chair one of our seminar sessions, you're more than welcome. Please follow the link on the Cambridge Reproduction website to find out more about how to do that. So I'll pass over now to our second speaker, Kim Alexander. So Kim is a first-year PhD student at the Department of History and Philosophy of Science here in Cambridge. Her research interests include reproductive health, particularly reproductive technologies, perceptions of fertility, and gendered experiences of healthcare. During her MSc, she developed an interest in the historiography of medicine and technology and began to consider the underexplored role of history in reproduction. Under the supervision of Professor Nick Hopwood, her PhD aims to construct the first sustained historiography of contraception. And in recovering this strand of the history of reproduction, she hopes to shed light on the significance of history in negotiating technological innovation and highlight its practical importance in decisions about birth control. Today, her presentation is titled Contraceptive Stories, Historical Writing and Technological Innovation. So over to you, Kim.
Okay, so great. So yes, coming from the humanities side of things, I am going to talk to you today about the topic of my PhD, which is contraceptive histories, or as I've called them here, contraceptive stories. And I really like the way the term stories for describing the material I'm interested in, because on the one hand, I think it goes some way to dismantling the assumption that it's only historians that are interested in writing these histories. That's not the case at all. Throughout the 20th century and now into the 21st century, a whole range of authors have used history to really kind of frame discussion of contraception. And this ranges from journalists to healthcare providers to campaigners to influencers and historians and other academics as well, of course. And I also think the term stories kind of goes some way to talk about, to kind of indicate how common these narratives are and how influential they've been to the history of reproduction as we understand it. These are the stories we tell about contraceptive innovation and what new contraception looks like, and about contraceptive practice and what we should be encouraging and what we shouldn't. So to just give you a little overview of how I'm going to do it today, I'm just going to give a little bit of background to the project and why I think it's important, and why I think there might be a bit of a problem with the way we talk about contraceptive innovation at the minute. Then I'm going to talk about the work which has led up to this point and why I think I might be onto something. And then I'm going to close just with a quick discussion about my approach and what I'm hoping to spend the next few years finding. So I am a first year, so I can't offer you much in terms of answers, I'm afraid, but I can offer you a lot of questions. And in terms of why histories of contraception, I think if there's sort of one question that could kind of sum up the rationale for why I think this is an important project to do, it would be this one, which is, can studying histories of contraception help us understand our relationship with contraception today? And this is one I can answer. I think anyway, admittedly, it's a bit of a broad answer, but that answer is yes, I think they can. Why do I think this? Well, quite apart from anything else, contraceptive histories are everywhere. I've put a few examples on the slide here. These are literally taken from the last couple of months, but if you start looking for them, trust me, you'll find them everywhere. You can see we've got Cosmopolitan, WebMD, Ella One is a brand of emergency contraceptive pill. And sometimes these histories are quite positive, like these ones. These all seem quite happy with the general trajectory of contraceptive development, but that's not always the case. And over the last couple of years, in particular, social media has really kind of been awash with people using history to express dissatisfaction at contraceptive development. I've got a couple of screen grabs from Instagram to demonstrate this. On the left, we've got a screenshot from Get the Lowdown, which is a kind of online contraceptive review platform comparing contraceptive development with iPhone development, not being very happy about it. And of course, there's a really important social and political history here as well. And on the right, we can see a piece written by the journalist Paula Akpan for Day, which is a period products manufacturer, about the anti-Black history of contraception. And probably doesn't come as a huge surprise, but this is exactly the sort of debate that we see playing out in academia as well. While it is still really common to see kind of celebratory narratives of contraceptive development and liberatory narratives of contraceptive development, the last few decades in particular have seen a lot of social and political histories that have come out kind of complicating this narrative, shall we say. And I've only got time to show you one example today, but it is of two absolute classics in the field. On the left, we've got the Medical History of Contraception by the American sociologist Norman E. Himes. This was first published in 1934. He was funded to write it by the American Birth Control League, and it was enormously influential. It was billed as the first large-scale history of contraception, and it was reprinted multiple times throughout the 20th century, and you will still find this cited, hugely influential. And then on the right, we've got a social history of contraception by Linda Gordon, Women's Body, Women's Right. This was first published in 1976, back when being a social historian itself was kind of quite a novel identity. And Gordon draws directly on Himes in her work, but where he spoke jubilantly of democratized knowledge of effective contraception, she recovered a different history, one in which birth control was quite a bit more controlling, particularly if you happen to not be white and rich. There are many, many other narratives I could speak about, and if you are interested in this, I have to do a shameless plug for Reproduction, Antiquity to the Present Day. A few people might recognise this. It's advertised on the Reproduction SRI website, if not. But it's a huge volume edited by members of the SRI, and there are many chapters in it by other members of the SRI. All of them are brilliant, and it's just a really good look at the role that history has played in reproduction, and I think it does a really good job of showing like how enlightening that can be. But I think we need to do more of it, particularly in the case of contraception, because quite apart from these kind of intellectual debates, as it were, there's also some really practical ones when it comes to contraception. History plays a really explicit role in current contraceptive policy. I've got a couple of examples here from the UN and the WHO, both of which use the distinction between modern and traditional contraceptive methods to target policies and to measure policy success. We also have this way of thinking in the West where the number of people relying on older contraceptive methods, in practice condoms and the pill, over modern long-acting reversible contraceptives, things like the coil and the implant, is presented as really problematic. There have been a whole host of public health initiatives to try and encourage people to sort of move over onto the implant and the coil. One, which you may have seen publicised, it came out last year in the UK. It was a 10-year scheme in which GPs had been paid to recommend the coil and the implant to patients. And as these headlines indicate, it was a bit controversial in that it was sort of declared a statistical success on the one hand, but it was also the subject of a pretty damning BPAS report on the other hand, which found a lot of coercion in this scheme's heart. And then quite apart from these kind of ethical questions, which are really important, there's also a real practical one, which is that this distinction between modern and traditional contraceptive methods doesn't really reflect the current state of contraceptive developments, where some of the most innovative technologies to come to the contraceptive market in the past few years have been based on some of the oldest contraceptive technologies we know. Got a few examples here. On the left, we've got the Kaya diaphragm. This was introduced in 2015. It was billed as the first one-size-fits-most diaphragm, so it avoided the need to have it fitted by a doctor or a nurse. In the middle, we've got natural cycles, very, very well publicized, and this was billed as the world's first contraceptive app. It is a fertility awareness-based method that uses an algorithm to calculate the fertile window of the menstrual cycle. And then far on the right, the most recent of all, Phexi. This came to market in 2020, only in the US currently, but it was billed as the first all-natural spermicide. And these caused real issues. In terms of natural cycles in particular, there was a huge debate in the press as to whether it was right that this was being described as a new contraceptive, whether this should have been allowed to be brought to market at all. And I've just highlighted here two competing reactions to the technology, to the same technology, in two different publications. So in 2017, we have Kate Wills in the Evening Standard declaring it a smart sexual revolution. And then we've got Amy Avadeza in the New Yorker a few months later, when Natural Cycles was licensed in the US, having a rather different approach, thinking it's as if we're dragging women back to the Middle Ages. So this kind of begs the question, I think, how did we get here? How can this be the case? How can we have these astonishing reactions to the same technology? Well, in terms of the work that has been done thus far, the history in relation to contraceptive technologies hasn't really been studied yet, nor is the concept of innovation, but I can consider works that have been written on the history of medicine and technology. Of these, the only one that considers contraception directly is this one. It's The Shock of the Old by David Edgerton, a historian. It came out in 2006, so it's about 15 years old now. But it is still an absolute classic, and this does consider contraception. It uses the pill and the condom as an example of his argument that we have a bit of a problem when it comes to new technologies. We have a tendency to kind of consider new technologies in a vacuum rather than in relation to older technologies that are kind of used to the same ends. And he says we see this for the pill and the condom. Historians are far more likely to write about the pill than the other range of contraceptive options available, and they're also still quite prone to sort of make really quite sweeping statements about the pill supplanting the condom, the pill replacing the condom, and this doesn't really tally with what actually happened, because condoms, not only have they continued to be developed as a technology, there's been multiple innovations in condom design, they also experienced a pretty dramatic increase in sales as a result of the AIDS pandemic in the 80s. So it seems that something else is going on here. And this certainly tallies with what I found. I think there is absolutely still this tendency for historians to focus on the pill and kind of make some assumptions about it. And what's interesting about that is that condom companies themselves have never had any qualms with marketing their products as new and exciting. I've got a couple of examples here. The one on the left is an advert from 1987 for menthol condoms, which are marketing themselves as the first condom that women would be happy to buy. And then on the right from Lalo Hex, much more recently, this in 2016, a company that claimed to have reinvented and re-engineered the condom. And this was part of a larger marketing campaign that just explicitly referred to their condoms as the condoms of the future. And we see this similarly happening in the other technologies that we spoke about. So I've got a few examples of natural cycles and Phexi adverts here, all quite pink and purple. But these also have no qualms in referring to themselves as the first and only contraceptive of their kind. However, as we saw earlier, reactions to these technologies are quite different, and these redesigned technologies seem to provide challenges to the historian in particular. We seem to really struggle to place these technologies in the history of reproduction as we've come to understand it. The most recent kind of largish scale history of contraception was written by the historian Donna Drucker in 2020, and she does consider natural cycles in it. But she's very conflicted. She sort of talks on how the algorithm is new on the one hand, but it's based on old science on the other hand. And then in her conclusion, I've got a quote here where she sort of lumps natural cycles in with a variety of behavioural methods, including withdrawal and abstinence, and talks about how they endure in the present, albeit kind of augmented with these new technological add-ons. And the reason I've highlighted this quote is that over 80 years previously, we find almost exactly the same argument in Hymes's History of Contraception, also about fertility awareness-based methods, this time pinpointed by knowing where ovulation is in the cycle and menstrual calendars and things that came out as a result of that. But Hymes makes exactly the same warning that although this might appear new, it's actually based on these really ancient technologies and therefore we shouldn't trust it. But what neither of these authors do, and what no one has done as far as I can see, is ask why we expect new contraceptive technologies to prevent conceptions in new ways. And this is a question that has bothered me for a while now. In my master's, I actually wrote a paper on natural cycles where I argued that the pill seems to have kind of cemented this way of thinking by being able to prevent ovulation and like prevent conception in a completely new way. The pill was this new science that Drucker seems to be looking for. And that's really the kind of hypothesis I take into my PhD, that this focus on the pill as the kind of benchmark of contraceptive innovation has cemented the distinction between traditional modern contraceptives and elided focus on other contraceptive developments. I think since then, any development in barrier methods, it doesn't seem to matter how effective they are or how innovative they are, has kind of been relegated to this sort of traditional contraceptive category. And just, with the caveat that these results are about as preliminary as you can get, the work I've been doing the last term does seem to kind of support this. I've got two examples here. One is an advertisement for NVD, one of the first contraceptive pills, where you can see the distinction between ancient medicine is made pretty explicitly. It explicitly refers it, compares it to Serranos, the Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Into my headphones for some point. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Sorry, apologies. But the writer famous for his writings, ancient writings on gynecology, and you can see the distinction is made quite clear. And then right at the bottom, there is an excerpt from Alan Guttemacher's speech made at a Serle & Co symposium, Serle & Co being the company that produced Enovid, in which, from 1961, in which he specifically declares the birth of the pill as this new era of physiologic conception control. But it's not all about the pill, is kind of my point. So in terms of what exactly I'm going to do over the next few years, the plan is to create the first kind of sustained historiography of contraception. So I've come up with two research questions that I'm really interested in. The first one, how have historical narratives been used in the description, promotion and rejection of contraceptive technologies? And then one for the historians, how have narratives of change in continuity in contraceptive practice shaped the history of reproduction as it has been written and read? And in terms of the material I'm going to ask these of, as I've hopefully made clear, quantity of material is not a problem, but I have had to narrow it down, sadly, to Anglo-American histories from around 1920 to around 1980. Those are still a little bit flexible, but to sort of give you a very brief idea of the kind of shifts you can chart in this time and why I thought it was a good idea to look at them. If we start in 1920, we have the birth control movement, histories produced by writers like Maurice Stopes, Margaret Sanger, and then, as we've seen, going into the 1930s, Norman E. Hymes as well. Eugenics played a very big undercurrent into these histories at these times, and we kind of come out of this period into the sort of post-World War II era of population control, by which point contraception has sort of stopped, well, not stopped being a taboo, but it's kind of handling this transition from being a taboo to being a social responsibility to keep population down. The Princeton Office for Population Research was established in this period. Then we have the pill. Enovid came along in 1957, initially licensed for menstrual disorders in the US, then as a contraceptive in 1960, 1961 in the UK. Catholic histories started emerging pretty soon after this. There was a really big hope that the Catholic Church might change its opinion on contraception, which, spoiler alert, did not happen. And then as we go into the 1970s, we sort of enter the era of the politicization of reproduction. Safety concerns about the pill were a huge part of this, and we come across several histories written by the women's health movement in this time, including Linda Gordon's Women's Body, Women's Right, as we spoke about earlier. And then after all of that, I'm hoping I can close with a chapter just sort of talking about how
these narratives have stuck around, and they continue to kind of pervade our expectation and our experiences of contraception today, and hopefully establish a frame for future research to show exactly how it's the case. So just to close up with a few take-home points. Basically, histories of contraception are everywhere. I don't think they're going anywhere anytime soon. I think studying them can help us reassess some pretty major narratives in the history of reproduction, which there's been some fantastic work that's just started to kind of look at these. And I think they can also help us, and I do mean all of us there, whether we are writing about contraception or using it or prescribing it or developing it, to really kind of reevaluate our expectations of it and question any assumptions about it we might not even know we're carrying. And thank you very much for listening. I have put my email there just in case anyone had any questions that came up after today that they wanted to talk about. Please feel free to email me at any point. Thank you.